All right, welcome to Managing Stress in a COVID-19 World. I am Bethany Zell. I'm the Program Director for Healthy You at Cary Medical Center. And I love that we're kind of focusing on mental health awareness this whole month of May, which is National Mental Health Awareness Month. And stress really does play an important role in mental health. It definitely can have positive or negative impacts on our mental health, our overall mental health and wellness. So it really is important that stress management kind of become a foundational part of our lives, just in an ongoing way. And then when you throw in some of the unprecedented things that we're dealing with kind of in the world today with this pandemic, it sometimes makes it feel like that stress management piece is just completely out of touch and not able to happen. So we're going to start with just some quick basics about what stress is. And so really it is our body's way of responding to any kind of demand. And that can be a good demand or a bad demand. Stress response is what will help us kind of push through long nights with babies and newborns that keep us awake. And it's also the same kind of response that will help us if we encounter a wild animal in the woods and give us a little more energy and stamina to maybe run a little faster than we normally would. So it could be in a response to good or a bad thing. You know, having a baby isn't a bad thing, but being awake and having sleep disruptions can certainly impact our levels of stress response. And again, it could be for something bad, like an intruder in your home. And, you know, that would be a correct stress response that might help motivate you in those moments. But it's really just a release of one of two hormones, adrenaline or cortisol, which is also known as that flight or fright response. And these chemicals, when they come in flooding in the way that they do when we have these stress responses, I mean, we have little gradual increases and decreases all throughout the day with these hormones, but when we have what's considered a stress response is just this overwhelming flood of these emotions. And that's where we kind of feel that flushing of our skin and, you know, our hearts begin to race. Those are all that because it's so much so fast. And ultimately these hormones impact how much serotonin we have in our brain. And serotonin, if it's a familiar term to you, it's also the one that we know as the happy hormone. And so long term, if we're constantly having these huge shifts in our hormone levels and our serotonin, over time, it can really take a toll on our mental health and overall well-being and happiness in life, and certainly plays a part in how we're feeling. So who is stressed out? And this is a study done, I believe it's done annually. It's by the American Psychological Association. It's called the Stress in America Study. And so they go around each year and collect data. And when asked to rate stress on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is very little and 10 is a whole bunch, it breaks down like this. So generally speaking, females tend to be a little more stressed out than men on an average day. And keep in mind, these are pre-pandemic numbers. This is 2019 data. So of course, this is all prior to what we're dealing with now. But women were pretty average, like right there at a 5.1. And so that's outside of the situation that we're dealing with right now. We're kind of in the halfway mark as women. Men were just slightly lower than that at a 4.6. So just kind of goes to show you. And then of course, it also differentiates between age groups. So we've got the millennials, which are the 1981 to 2000 generation, and they're at about a 5.4. And that's pretty elevated, but the Generation Xers are our 1965 to 1980 crew. That's the yellow golden line there. And they're at about a 5.5. So it's interesting. In 2019, there was a little bit of an uptick where those two kind of crossed paths and changed in their status of being stressed out. Then we've got our boomers, which is the green line, and that's the people that are born from 1965 to 1946 to 1964. And so they're at about a 4.2. And then you've got the older adults, and these are people who were born before 1945. So generally speaking, the 1900 to 1945 folks. And they're, kind of been steady at a 3 or right within that 3 and 4 range for several years at this point. So I don't think it's going to be any surprise, though, that these different age groups also are more or less concerned about certain topics, and those things will change. Obviously, I may not be worried about some of the things, retirees may be worrying about. I'm certainly not worrying about the same thing that people in the college years or parents of like infant children. I'm kind of in the middle there. And so when we look at our youngest group, our youngest segment that were surveyed in this Stress in America study, really the focus on those, for those younger generations, is the money and the work. And then not too far behind are those family responsibilities and health-related concerns. And so we'll see over the course of this that we all have similar concerns, and there are definitely overlaps in what stresses us out, but what's concerning about money for millennials may not be what's concerning for money in the older adult population. And so we'll see this here on the next slide. So you'll see where they kind of rank, but mostly they're concerned about the money. Where am I getting the pay that I need to do what I need to do? And that's mostly from my work. And so that makes sense because they're younger in their careers potentially. So they're looking at advancing and where are we kind of going from here? How can I support myself and get ahead in that financial way? And then as they move into the boomer generation or the boomer age bracket, they're beginning to now feel a little older, feeling those physical impacts, and now they're becoming more worried about those health-related concerns. And that's, only going to be compounded by what we're currently dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. And so you'll still see, especially with the boomers, they're still working. They still have some financial concerns. Maybe they have college-age children or adult children that are struggling to kind of get by. And most boomers might still be working in theory, and financial concerns are still going to be an issue for them, whether they're helping to support maybe some of their millennial or Xer adult children who haven't kind of taken off, or whether they were just kind of worrying about like, oh my goodness, I'm getting closer to retirement and I haven't really made any plans to that end. So, and then of course, when you get to that older adult population, this is the group that's primarily retired on a fixed income. And so their biggest concern, as you see here, is completely reasonable. Their concern is that health-related issue. And of course, the economy, things that mostly are outside of our control. Family responsibilities, and again, you still see money and relationships in there in the mix, but as you see, job stability for these two groups is way less important than it was, and way less stressful than it was for our millennial Xers on the other page. And so it's really not surprising. But then when we talk about COVID and what a worldwide pandemic can add to that, other things that people might be concerned about in a COVID-19 pandemic, more stressors. So maybe it's, we're already worried about money and work, but maybe we've now had a change in income. Maybe we've lost a job in our household, or hours have been cut, or pay has been decreased. You're not getting that income that you rely on. So that's an additional stressor. Of course, the isolation of being home and, staying safe at home, and here in Maine or wherever you're watching from, we all have different kinds of quarantine isolation strategies in place, but that isolation can also be an additional stressor, especially for those of us who are much more kind of extroverted and really crave that physical interaction and the in-person, face-to-face. Eye contact is hard to kind of do in a virtual world. And so people can feel very, very alone in this virtual world. Fear over, am I going to get sick? Is someone I love going to get sick? The anger that comes from being told that we can't go where we want to go when we want to go, and maybe we're not getting our questions answered quickly enough. I know when the testing problems were all kind of beginning and rolling out, people were angry that we weren't getting access to the testing that we needed. And of course, as this drags on, people, I think in general are just getting angrier about being stuck at home. We call it stuck at home, And so, again, additional stressors, worrying about health in general for themselves, for their loved ones, for the people living with them. And then, of course, concern for the loved ones, maybe even that are farther away. I don't know about anyone watching this, but we don't have a lot of cases of COVID-19 where I live, but I have a lot of friends and family in other parts of the country that have experienced significant loss. And even friends who've been hospitalized with COVID and had people pass away in my family, far away. And so, having that stress of, you've got loved ones who are struggling however far away, and you can't even be there for them really in person, or, people who are passing away alone and not able to get to their loved ones who need them in other parts of the country. Of course, the confusion and the mixed messaging that's out there, and it's kind of hard to know. Everything's changing so quickly. First we mask, then it's no masks, then it's wear the gloves, no gloves. So it's kind of like, oh my gosh, who do I listen to here? All of these things are adding to that stress. Loss of control, and this is, all those things that we feel like we're taken away, and not being able to know who has COVID and are they a carrier, am I a carrier, and I just don't feel sick. We don't know. The information overload, and this ties right in with that confusing mixed messages. It's just everywhere. And so it becomes very difficult to disconnect from all that messaging. Expenses that might be upcoming, of course, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and incomes are being influenced. And of course, my washing machine decides to crap out. So it's like, of course it happened right now. And then, a couple weeks later, my dryer decides to kick the bucket. So it's like, oh my goodness, we just didn't need this right now. But big expenses that may be coming out. And, right now we're in a situation where we can't even get the dryer. Like, they're so back ordered. It's going to take them a month to deliver it to us. And we can't just get it at the store. It's a whole access issue. So besides the cost and figuring out how to pay for things, you've also got the logistics of how do we access what we need? How do we get what we need? I mean, we're using a dryer that's so loud I had to move into another room to record this, because we're just hoping it'll hang in there till our delivery comes in a month. So how do we get the things we need? It's all just additional stress on already impactful situations. Maintaining those relationships, how do we do that? How can relationships survive this? My husband is he wants eye connection. Like, he wants me to look up from whatever I'm doing and look at him. And I have friends like that really just savor that one-on-one interpersonal relationships, face-to-face. And if they don't have that eye contact, it's isolating for them. And so how do we maintain relationships? That could be a stressor that's really bothering people. Maybe people are just not into virtual living. And then, of course, disappointment and grief, and this can take all the different shapes. I mean, we've had so many things that are canceled. I've got vouchers for travel that I don't even know when I'm going to ever feel like taking those trips or making those trips, or if I ever will. And that's okay. But, disappointment over what we've lost. And it's okay to grieve those things because, we look forward to things. That's what kind of gets us through. And that's a big stress management tool, is kind of setting things up for yourself to look forward to. And so what happens when all of those things have kind of been taken away, so to speak? And how do we deal with that disappointment and that grief? And so when we talk about all these different stressors, when I first began to kind of study this topic more in depth, I was very surprised at some of the physical manifestations of stress that I really never attributed to a stress response. I always just thought, I just don't feel good. But stress over time, particularly what they consider chronic stress, can take physical illness type impacts to your body. And it can feel, like you've got the flu. It can feel like depression. It can feel very real and very like I'm sore and I'm achy. It can be a lot of different things. So, just in those moments when we're stressed out, your body begins to sweat a little more. We notice these physical changes. You feel that heart rate going crazy and your heart beating out of your chest. Muscle tension, you tighten up, and this is whether you're falling down a set of stairs or tripping, your body will tense up in response. That's that stress response. And so these are all physical ways that stress can manifest. Headaches, over time, it can become such a rampant part where those hormones are flooding our body so constantly that it causes those hormone disruptions to continually create these pains and aches within our bodies. So headaches, stomach aches, upset stomach. My oldest daughter gets notoriously bad stomach aches when she would take a test in school. And so it was always just the stress of, I'm going to be on the spot here and I've got to face this stressor. And it would always present itself for her with stomach aches. Tiredness, whether or not you have the energy, sometimes stress and working through it can really just be a physical energy zapper. And of course, we all know those mood tendencies that tend to be impacted. Of course, we can be more hostile and definitely get to those places of feeling helpless and just in general unhappy. And going right in hand with that isolation piece is the loneliness. And then, of course, we can handle things badly and begin to do destructive things to our body in the name of stress management. So this might look like binge eating or reduced eating, like holding back. Maybe we can't control the stressors in our lives, and so we're eating instead, or we're not eating because those are the things that we can control. Substance abuse and use, erratic sleep habits. I've had a couple friends that have gotten so overwhelmed with different stress in their lives that they've actually just gotten on a completely weird and erratic sleep pattern, like up all night and sleeping all day. And so they're really not interacting with the world. And that's their means of coping with their stress because, they're awake when the rest of the world, most of it is sleeping. And then they're sleeping when the rest of the world is awake. And that's just kind of another way of escaping. And so those can be some significant outcomes. Memory loss, we really don't feel like it could have that impact, but absolutely when we're enduring high levels of constant stress, it can impair our ability to recall information that we know. It can even be stuff that's usually on the tip of our tongue, our kids' names or our best friend's phone numbers or things that we just know that we know. And if we're dealing with a lot of stress, that can impact. And of course, along with that are those concentration problems and not being able to focus in. And then ultimately, it can really lead us down that road to bigger depression and anxiety problems, some of which we might not even, it might get so out of control that it may be beyond our control to even rein it back in without some kind of professional help or even a medicinal intervention, which, there is absolutely no shame in reaching out and getting the help that you need. So we are going to talk today, though, just about a few ways that people do cope with stress. And so I did highlight some of these, but, in general, it sometimes feels easier to default to some of the things that we feel in those moments kind of give us comfort, like we're stressed out. And so we stay up late, binge watching a show, and then we get into these unhealthy sleep patterns that we can then no longer, we get to the point where we can't correct it anymore. And then we need to go to sleep and we can't because we've kind of trained our bodies to deal with our stress this way. And then, of course, going even deeper into that, some people turn to self-harm and looking at ways to hurt themselves to deal with that stress. And they find that that's a way of releasing some of that pressure that they're feeling. And again, that could be self-harm. It could be harm against somebody else. So violence or aggression toward others, maybe even people who are trying to help you through some of the stress that you're dealing with. And then, of course, one that we mentioned on the previous slide, overeating and binge eating as a means of kind of stuffing down and covering up, or trying to cover up the problems that we're facing or the stressors that we're facing, or, and this was a big stronghold in my life that took me many years to overcome, because it felt good in those moments. And there was always guilt and shame afterward, but it just, I felt like, oh, it makes me feel good to eat when I'm stressed out, or, and when we're stressed out, we're not normally craving carrots or something healthy. We're craving those bad things. And so when we do overeat in a stress response, it's not usually overeating or binging out on salads. So this is where it becomes a little more dangerous and can cause even more physical repercussion than what we're looking for. And then again, when we're feeling out of control, maybe skipping meals or not eating is something that we can hold on to and control. And so some people will turn to that as a negative pattern for dealing with their stress. Of course, that isolating is huge, trying to just make it go away, push the world away, whether it's holding up in your house or, sleeping all day, just trying to avoid. It's basically that avoidance. And then going into the substance use or abuse, that's another means for avoidance, where you're kind of altering your reality, or, self-medicating really to deal with whatever the stressors of the world are. And so some of these are very common in lives of people who are dealing with stress. And, is it bad to have a beer at the end of the day if you get home, you've had a rough day at work? I'm not saying it is or it isn't. It really depends on you and your motivation. But looking at any of these pieces as a means for a long-term solution can really just be harmful to the conversation and to your thinking that over a long period of time, any of these would be a viable option for helping you heal or work through some of the stress, is really just the wrong answer. And so we're going to talk about some of the things that we can do to help with our stress. So we need to start, and this sounds some of these may be remedial, but okay, the first one is drinking plenty of water. Now, hydration is essential for so many different things beyond just the stress management piece. At the point where we begin to feel thirst, that is a stress response. Our body is already beginning to produce those cortisol and adrenaline chemical responses within our body. So at the moment where you're like, ooh, I feel a little thirsty, your body's already creating, even if it's just on a mild level, a stress response within your body. And so obviously it's not the level of, oh my goodness, there's a bear in front of me and how do I get out of here kind of a stress response. But it's still a stress response. And throughout the day, if you have multiples of those, you're setting yourself up to have your body up to have to work harder to overcome some of the stress responses. So if we can eliminate some of these stress responses right out of the front gate, then we leave room for the things that are completely outside of our control. So obviously, hydrating properly is one of the best means that we can start to set the foundation and the platform for a proper stress management system. And so obviously, drinking one glass of water is not going to fix all your stress problems, but making sure that regularly your body is properly hydrated and not waiting for your body to give itself those cues of thirst, but sipping throughout the day. I carry my water bottle around all the time, everywhere I go. And I sip on it all day long. And, I'm pretty busy. I don't have time to run to the restroom a million times a day. So I don't chug a glass and then neglect it for an hour. I usually just sip throughout the day, and then I don't really have any major issues. Kind of an interesting little meter to know whether you're properly hydrated is to look in the toilet when you go and you urinate and look at the color, and it will give you an indication of where you stand with this particular skill, whether you're properly hydrating or whether you're very dehydrated. Obviously, the more yellow your urine is, the more dehydrated you are. I do want to just note, if you're taking there are certain B vitamins that will create a very bright yellow. So if you do take a B vitamin supplement, don't be afraid and think you're, oh my goodness, I've been drinking gallons of water and I still bright yellow. Yes, that will happen with, so, if you are taking supplements, just research and make sure that it's not one that will affect the color of your urine. But this is a very simple, easy way that we can kind of get an idea of where we stand with our hydration. So drinking plenty of water. Getting good sleep. So instead of that whole night owl mentality, hunkering down, isolating, staying up when the rest of the world is sleeping to avoid, it really is important that we get the proper amount of sleep. And I'm sorry that this particular graphic is a little bit blurry, but in addition to stress, there are just so many other terrible health impacts from improper sleep, and the quality, specifically speaking to the quality of sleep. 30% of adults suffer from some type of insomnia. And because of sleep disruptions, that directly impacts our immune system. And so, for those age groups who are concerned about health, they have health concerns, and that's something that's stressing them out. By not getting the proper amount of sleep, you're possibly making your immune system even more susceptible to diseases and infections. And lack of good sleep can lead to the risk of obesity. And this is because when we sleep, our hormones kind of balance out in the middle of the night and we stabilize. And so when we wake up the next day, we're kind of energized and feeling refreshed, and our hormones, in theory, for the most part, have come back into alignment with good quality sleep. And so when those hormones stay out of whack, it can really do a lot to our weight and impact how easily we keep weight off, take it off, and how easily it stays on. And so if we're creating these inflammatory responses in our bodies, that can certainly lead to weight gain and all different kinds of obesity issues. It also impacts our heart, our primary muscle, and it needs the rest that it needs to be able to function properly. Causes depression and irritability when you don't get enough sleep. I don't think anyone would be surprised about that. I know I'm not, rising up and ready to run a marathon when I wake up in the morning after a bad night's sleep. And so that really makes a lot of sense. Obviously, it leads to slower reaction times when we're out and about in our community. So we can harm ourselves and others if we're chronically tired. People get injured on the job more when they are having lack of sleep issues, and it can just cause careless errors that could have been avoided with the proper rest, which is one of the reasons, like truckers, they have some limits on how much driving time they can have before they have to pull over and are mandated to take a rest. And that's all because of some of this evidence that they've found through some of these studies. Sleeping 5 or fewer nights a night can increase your mortality risk. So over time, a lower amount of quality sleep can impact and reduce your life. So the recommendation for most adults is to get about 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And again, this is quality sleep. And so what that really looks like is as much of it as you can get before midnight. Then you have the better chance of moving into that REM sleep. And REM is where you get that quality. That's the rapid eye movement phase. And that's where you get that good quality sleep that's going to help balance out those stress hormones that got all out of whack through your day. And then when you wake up in the morning, you'll be back closer to alignment. Whereas if you're not getting the proper amount of sleep or the good quality sleep, you're waking up still out of alignment from the day before. And then you're setting the foot on the ground and it's going to get even further out of alignment. And over just the course of a handful of days, you can really begin to see the full impact of improper and non-quality sleep. And just a little tip that I have to add, and it's as much for myself maybe as everyone else in the technological virtual age, the blue light that's associated with and emits from our screens can be a sleep disruptor. It really does block the production of melatonin, which is another hormone that our body produces to help us go to sleep naturally. And that blue light that emits, and it doesn't have to necessarily look blue to us, that's what the term is behind the scenes from the IT experts. I don't know if it's ultraviolet. I'll have to get more info on that. But there's a specific type of light emitted from all of our electrical devices that just kind of triggers our brain to keep working and stop. It does not allow for the production of melatonin. So even though, I will like fall asleep holding my cell phone in my hand, and physically I'll feel like, okay, I go to sleep, I went to sleep, but meanwhile, my brain is, even if you're physically asleep, your brain is still processing that blue light for, a couple more hours afterward. So they really recommend that you shut down your technology, remove it from your room. Don't keep technology where you sleep, because even, as you're sleeping, our machines will sometimes, if they're plugged in and charging, sometimes they'll continue to cycle through, and sometimes I'll hear my fan come on my laptop when it stays plugged in if I haven't like done a hard shutdown. And so as much as we can remove some of those blue light emitting sources from where we sleep, the better. And so the recommendation, like I said, is about 1 hour before you plan to go to sleep, shut things down, pick up a book, have some herbal tea, create that bedtime routine I've talked about a lot in other Healthy You programs. Kind of set up a little routine for yourself that gets your body thinking it's time for sleep, and work through those steps, whether it's having that hot cup of tea or journaling or reading a chapter in a regular book, not an e-reader, which would emit that light. But finding those few things that you can do to kind of trigger your brain, like, okay, we're winding down. Hot shower, brushing your teeth, hot tea, whatever it is, to create that routine. And then cautioning against caffeine later in the afternoon, because again, that will continue to process through your body, will continue to have to work through it, even if you physically can get to sleep. I used to feel like I could drink lattes at 10 o'clock and I could go to sleep, but my body was still working hard to kind of process out that caffeine. And so ultimately it still does impact us negatively in the sleep regard. So my next tip for stress management is to have healthy snacks on hand. So I can not even tell you how many times I have been so stressed out and just eaten crap, too much crap, because that's what was there. Or I didn't have a healthier option available. And so I went to the drive-thru, or I went to the ice cream store, or whatever it was. So, it's not going to save us every single time, but if we're prepared and we have healthy snacks on hand, and it has to be a healthy snack you like, or that you tolerate at least, because when we're stressed out, we're not generally, like I said, craving salads. We're not, looking for healthy ways to bolster our immune system with our stress snacks. We're looking for usually the high fat, high sugar, salty, comfort foods that we feel like make us feel better. So identifying healthier solutions and having those things on hand wherever you tend to get stressed. So for me, when I was commuting in from New Jersey to New York City, and I was quitting cigarette smoking at the time, this is like a decade ago. Oh my gosh, that was probably some of the most stressful days of my life, sitting in bumper to bumper traffic, not smoking a cigarette, and freaking out, basically, like, these cars need to move or I'm going to kill somebody. So having those healthy snacks in my purse would have been fantastic. It would have been a way that I could have helped myself in those moments. And so now that I've kind of gotten this insight, I generally try and keep a healthy snack that I like handy at all times, whether it's in my purse or whether it's in my desk at my office when I'm working there, and obviously in my home, in my car, keep them in the glove box if you could find ones that aren't perishable. But making sure you kind of think ahead to those moments where you might encounter stress, going to a meeting where they might have a whole bunch of foods that I'm allergic to, and I know I could technically eat them, but I know it might make me sick later. Having those healthy snacks doesn't leave me without a choice. It gives me an opportunity to make a better choice in those moments. So this is not an exhaustive list. These are just a few of the things that I kind of turn to. These are my go-tos for healthy snacks. And I really do need to update this granola bar photo because it doesn't even feature the one bar that I actually do eat the most, which is Kind bars. I love those. But one caveat with the bars, you really need to just read the labels because some of them are nothing more than souped up candy. Basically just sugar and grains in a bar with no real nutritional value. So what I try and look for with my snacks, I always look to try and find, I read the labels very carefully and I look for something that has some kind of protein, and I always try and aim to have some kind of fiber. Those two things in combination, a protein and a fiber, will tend to fill you up and make you feel a little more satisfied. So if you're really stressed out and you down your sorrows or your stress in potato chips, it's not going to fill you up. And 10 minutes from now, you could eat that entire bag of Doritos or whatever, and you're still going to be physically hungry because it didn't have any protein, it didn't have any fiber. Your body doesn't even recognize that you just ate because you just did it with this overwhelming face in the bag emotional response. And so looking for snacks that kind of pack a punch and give a little bit of a nutritional boost are going to help us manage those out of control stress hormones even better. So I always look for ones that have at least a couple grams of protein, like I said, and at least a gram or two of fiber. If you can get more, even better. Some of the Kind bars do have ones that are like 4 grams of protein and like 5 grams of fiber. And then of course you really want to watch the sugar content as well. Because some of them will have, 20 to 25 grams of sugar in them. And just to translate that down, 4 grams of sugar is equal to 1 teaspoon. So if you have a little tiny Quaker Oats chewy granola bar and it has 24 grams of sugar in it, that's 6 teaspoons of sugar. And like, I wouldn't put that in my coffee. I wouldn't give that to my kids. I would never just hand them like 6 teaspoons of sugar and be like, here, that's a healthy snack for you, go for it. And so, but we do this, and especially with that particular brand, I think there's like less than 1 gram of fiber and I think there might be 1 gram of protein, and they might have added a few things in there over the years that maybe brought it to 2 grams of protein, but really with just that, it's really nothing more than a sugar kick. So, all this to say, temper yourselves with the granola bars. It's not something I really try not to overdo it with granola bars. That's not my number one go-to. And I usually try and limit it to maybe at most once, maybe twice a week if I have a granola bar, because it's not the most optimal unless you find a really great source of a bar, or you can even make your own. A lot of people, especially now in this environment, are finding new ways to make healthy treats that maybe they can't access as easily in this environment. So there are healthier ways that you could maybe make your own granola bars or your own homemade granola and have more control over the ingredients going in. Nuts are a great one too. They're super portable. If you can get them in the little individual packs, pre-packaged, you can get them in little 100-calorie packs. I never ever recommend that anyone get the giant can of Planters and go sit on the couch with it and just start digging in, because they're still exceptionally high in fat, and it does have some health characteristics, but too much of any kind of fat can be unhealthy. And so, portion them out, take a small handful. If you want them to be portable and you don't want to pay extra for the little individual packages, you can pre-make your own little nut mix packages. Baggy them up, and you can even get a few different kinds of nuts in bulk and for less money than you might pay for a pre-mixed packaged product. And you can create your own little nut mixes and throw in your own little seeds and add in your own little dried fruits or whatever, create your own trail mixes, and then portion them out so that you have them handy when you need them. This is one that really got me through a lot of when I lost the bulk of my weight. These were snacks that I loved. They helped me, these next two helped me so much with my sweet tooth. This little The Good Bean, these are dried chickpeas. And it sounds so weird and terrible. And when I saw them in the store, I was like, ew, I kind of liked hummus at the time. And, there were a few things I could tolerate, some chickpea. I felt like I tolerated them okay. And so I tried a bunch of different flavors and I found a few that I liked, and there were a couple that weren't as good for me. I didn't care for them. But this particular snack, because it is a bean, very high in fiber, very high in protein, you can eat a pretty satisfying quantity. It's been a while. I think it might be like a third to a half of a cup was a serving. And so I could just portion that out and have it in a little bowl next to me while I worked. And it I could pick at it and it would tide me over. The sweet cinnamon one, I don't know if you can see it. It's the one all the way to the left. Oh my goodness. I almost had a problem with my kids like overeating this one because it was so delicious. And it was just that right amount of sweet with very little sugar. I think it was like 2 grams of sugar or something in the entire portion that I would use. And so I felt good about giving it to my kids as a mom, and they loved them. They would just pop those little things, and it had like a cinnamon sugar kind of coating to it. It was delicious. The next one that we loved, we used to be able to get it at our Rite Aid. I think I've seen them at Walgreens. I know you can get all of these things on Amazon now, but these are somersaults. They're little sunflower seed bites, and they had the Dutch cocoa one to the right. So this was a great little fix for my sweet tooth. I think 9 of these little nuggets was a serving, and they're little tiny nugget circles. But I would pack up like little baggies of those and keep them in my purse. And, when I was really having a sweet tooth craving or stress response, like either the sweet cinnamon chickpeas or these little Dutch cocoa things would sometimes, I'd say 9 times out of 10, stop me from going to get ice cream or any other kind of sweet tooth issue that would have been my normal go-to stress response. So just another great option. They had some chili versions and some more savory, different flavors, and I'm sure they probably got more flavors, but our family is really fans of the Dutch cocoa. This is a snack I've just really started getting into actually throughout this whole COVID-19 pandemic. I had the apple chips by Bear before, but the coconut chips, oh my goodness. And they have a coconut chip, a chocolate coconut chip that is delicious. These are not as high in fiber or protein as the others. They still have a little bit, and of course the different variations are different. Apples, I think, have a little less than the coconut, and bananas might be the same as the apple. But they're just, at least I know there's some nutritional boost in there. It's not just food for the sake of eating food with no real nutritional value. So, preparing as much as we can, having those healthy snacks available, easily accessible, can help a lot when we're dealing with those stress responses in the moment. If we are dealing with that stressful phone call and we don't have anything that we really enjoy in our house that could help us through those few moments of that stress response, we're more inclined to go out and make a bad food choice that will have long-lasting impacts that we don't want. Okay, physical activity. This is another great one that should be implemented at all times. And physical activity looks different for different people, but physical activity really is responsible for the production of those endorphins, which are the chemicals in our brain that really act like natural painkillers. They improve our ability to sleep, and that all in turn impacts our stress levels. So ways that we can make this a priority: schedule it in. Make a date with yourself. If you put that you have a doctor's appointment in your planner and in your calendar, and you get to that day and you see that you have this appointment, written in there or put in your little thing, and you're getting a reminder on your phone, you're not going to be as inclined to cancel as if you say, oh, I'll get to the gym sometime this week, and you didn't schedule it, and then Friday rolls around and you haven't done it, and you're like, oh. Schedule it in, make a date with yourself, make it a priority for yourself. We're all home, a lot of us are home a little more and not getting out, even if we were limited on getting out and about and moving around before going to and from work. If we're working from home, maybe we're even moving less than we were. So a little thing you can do if you're sitting a lot, or if you work in a job that requires you to be still, use the guidelines, sit for 60, move for 3. So every 60 minutes, get up and kind of move around, whether it's walking to another room, stretching out, whatever you can do. Set a little timer on your phone. I know my Fitbit yells at me if I sit for too long and like vibrates on my arm, like, get up, feed me steps. Whatever you can do to kind of just get yourself in the habit of getting up, because sitting for too long can be very, very detrimental to our bodies. And, one of the big excuses for not being physically active, people are like, oh, I don't have an hour. I don't have time to go and do this or that. But there's a lot of good evidence out there now that shows that even if you can't do a 1-hour workout straight through, even if you can do 15 to 20 minutes a couple times a day, first of all, it's going to be better and more than what you're doing by not doing anything. And they're showing now through the studies that even breaking it up and doing a little bit a couple times a day is just as beneficial as a full straight 60-minute straight workout. So there's really no excuse. You can find videos online at this time of all different kinds of video lengths, from 5 minutes to 45 minutes. I actually just got an app. It was like $3 for the entire year. And it was called and I downloaded it because it was called the Healthy You app. But it's you with a U and not like My Healthy You. And so for $3 for the entire year, I have this library of like 75 videos, and it's all different lengths, different types of workouts. Some of them are like mindfulness things. Some of them are meditation. Some of them are, kickboxing. So find something you like and find a way to get it in. And like I said, anything you do is going to be better than nothing. And it will help produce those endorphins, which will help with our stress. And endorphins, although, for some of us, the act of exercising may feel miserable, afterward, we feel very good about ourselves. We feel good and we feel successful and we feel accomplished. And those feelings can really have a great bearing on our overall stress. And then there are some people that have physical limitations. And even if you don't have physical limitations, maybe you don't want to work out extremely hard. So finding a way to incorporate stretching or yoga or deep breathing into your day, taking that deep breath just a few times a day to kind of focus on your breathing. And it may seem silly and it may seem hokey. I know when I first started doing it, it made me feel hokey, but deep breathing really truly is one of the easiest, freest ways that you can begin to manage stress. I mean, if you think about it, if you're in, bumper to bumper traffic, like I described earlier with my commute to New York, and someone cuts me off and immediately I'm like on my horn and angry, and I can feel that tension and those stress responses flow in. Nothing can be so immediately calming as just taking a moment to just. And if you do, even just then, I felt that kind of the peace and that calm kind of wash over me. And so, it's amazing how quickly that tool is accessible to all of us. And in those moments of stress, if your kids are making you crazy because they're home right now and they want to get on their iPads all day long, or, Mom, what are we going to do? What's for dinner? That just reconnecting with your breath can be so helpful and really doesn't require any kind of physical exertion. Stretching, if you're looking for something to do in your little 3 minutes of sit for 60, move for 3, it could be even something you can do in your chair, stretching around, twisting, bending on your door frame, standing up in the room that you're working in. You don't even have to necessarily leave your room. You don't need fancy equipment. You don't need a home gym. You don't need any of those things. There are tons of resources. And when I post the replay link for this, I've got a couple links to some great little desk workouts at your desk and chair yoga positions that sometimes it's nice to even just have them printed out. I have this little animation on a little cardstock piece next to my desk computer at my office. And so I've got it there kind of in the peripheral while I'm working. And so when I do kind of get that reminder to get up, it gives me something right there in front of me that I can look to put into that time. And so it's just kind of that visual cue for me, like, remember, keep stretching, keep moving, don't get tense, watch your posture. It's just sometimes we need those little visual cues. Staying connected with others. This is so essential right now, but just because we can't be together doesn't mean, just because we can't be together in person doesn't mean that we can't be together. We can still be together. We can be together in an environment like this. And I don't know if any of you have had the opportunities to meet up with friends in Zoom. FaceTime is another great option if you're on a phone, one-on-one. Facebook has now started a new thing. I haven't even had time to check it out. I think I just saw it pop up last week for the first time, Facebook Rooms, which I think is similar to this Zoom platform. So you can kind of get on with more than one person and kind of chat. And then, of course, you can use Facebook Messenger. There's all different ways to stay connected. And now as things begin to open up, we can look for some other unique ways to stay connected. If you've got a big driveway, you could have friends drive through. You could have a little chat outside your windows. You could hang out in your driveway and talk. Of course, keeping whatever social distancing measures are still in place in your area in mind. My sister just had a 10-year-old birthday parade for my niece and nephew. And she happened to have one of those driveways that you can drive up one side and drive down the other. And so their friends came right through and held out gifts to the kids and kind of waved and stopped and chatted for a second and wished them well and went on. And it was just a unique thing that I'm sure they're never going to forget, that their 10th birthday was they had a parade come through their house. So we can do that, with our loved ones. My mother-in-law is afraid to kind of come into the house just yet, but she's come over and sat in her car in the driveway and talked to us from her car. And so finding ways to stay connected, reaching out to our neighbors and asking what they need, making, if you're going to the store, see how they're doing. And then another thing I've really just recently started doing, because we really don't know, as this goes on, we don't know when it's going to end. We don't know what everybody else is dealing with. We don't know everybody's unique situations. And so I've started this thing where I'm just trying to connect with everybody. Anybody I see out in the community, I'm trying to be something positive for that person in that moment. So that looks like, if I'm driving down my block and I happen to pass another oncoming car, I might look a little foolish, but I'm like, hey, I'm always waving and smiling at oncoming people, because you really honestly don't know. That my face may be the only face that person in that car saw all day, in this context. And so who am I to deprive anyone of having an engagement with anybody, whether it's a fleeting wave from a car coming at you, or whether we're walking into the grocery store together. And I've had conversations with people I didn't know while we're putting on our masks, walking into the store. And it's like, can you believe we're putting on masks to go to the grocery store right now? And so, but you really don't know. Every interaction that you have may be the only interaction that that other person has all day. So we all need this connection. And as much as we can kind of be that light in the world and be a smile, even if it's just a smile and a wave, just an acknowledgement saying, I see you, we're in this, we're all here together dealing with this situation. And it can be a huge stress relief. And, a lot of people are kind of walking through this whole situation in a kind of a ghostly state where, they're living by themselves, or they're way out of town and isolated. Maybe, coming to the grocery store one time a week is really the only time they see people. So aside from the cashier, I'm trying to give somebody something, it may seem silly, maybe my smile is not great enough to make anybody feel awesome in the moment, but it makes me feel good to know that I'm making an effort, and it's not always easy for me. I'm an introvert, and so I tend to kind of keep my head down and walk in and do my thing and try and get in and out and be efficient. Taking that extra second, though, to engage somebody in this time where people are really hurting and feeling so disconnected, um, can only help with the stress that people are dealing with. This is something I personally had to kind of, I feel like this slide could totally be me around week 2, week 3 of this, where, we have all these messages coming in, and sometimes it's hard to know what to believe. Who do we listen to? How much should I listen to it? And so obviously I work for a hospital, and so I'm in the healthcare realm, and I'm getting all of these messages from work. And then because I work in public and community relations, I have to stay plugged into kind of the news cycle a little bit. But in the very beginning, I was taking in way too much COVID news. And I could tell it was just, I was seeing some of those impacts of the stress of it all in my own life. And it got to the point where my husband was like, I don't know if it's good for you to just be listening to this all day. Like, you're done with work, you're home from work, and now you're listening to this press conference, and you're listening to the governor of New York on his press conference. And it, because I have family spread out throughout the country, I kind of wanted to get some of these other different messages, but it got to a point where it became too much. So, as far as the stress management end of things with this COVID pandemic, it's really important that we kind of identify maybe 1 or 2 really reliable sources that we trust for information, and just focusing on limiting that intake to those couple trusted sources, because it really can become wholly overwhelming and definitely long-term have that negative impact that we're looking at for our stress. Making self-care a priority. This is huge, because as we're going through this, things aren't necessarily getting easier. Things are changing all the time, and so we need to adapt. And it can feel like a full-time job to keep up. But it's ultra important that in the midst of this, taking care of our loved ones and keeping our kids safe and keeping our moms and dads and all the people that we love safe, it's important to also just be worrying and looking out, not in a selfish way, it's not selfish, but being sure that we're taking the time that we need to process through some of the things that we're dealing with. And maybe we're feeling stronger and a little more confident than some of the other people in our lives, but that doesn't mean that we don't need self-care. So I just quickly want to just draw attention to this graphic, and it's not mine, but I thought it was really awesome, because there are a lot of myths about self-care, that it's indulgent and it means that you're selfish and that you can just take care of yourself once and go to the spa and then life is good again and you never have to deal with it again. And oh yeah, I self-cared. I went on a girls' weekend retreat that one time 3 years ago, and we're good. Self-care is an ongoing thing that needs to be maintained. We constantly have to chisel out a little bit of time, and it doesn't have to be huge. And that's another one of these myths, that it's time consuming, that we have to do this big, huge, elaborate thing. But that's really not true. Self-care can be super simple. It can be as simple as having the ability and the courage to come forward and ask for what you need. It could be, putting those boundaries in place between home and work. I know that's been a big struggle for me right now, is trying to define, work Bethany with home Bethany, because it's all kind of happening here at the same place at home. And so, setting those boundaries for myself and saying, okay, I'm not going to work in this room. I'm going to work in this designated area. And part of chiseling that area out for myself was self-care, and making sure that I knew I needed to differentiate so that lines didn't get blurred and I would get overwhelmed. Sometimes it can just be saying no, taking a step back, going for a walk on your own, whatever you need to do, taking a hot bath, diffusing some essential oils, doing some yoga. There's so many different ways. It doesn't have to be complicated, and it is definitely not selfish. And I just remind you that, we can't care for others if we're not caring for ourselves first. It's very, very difficult to serve when you're stressed out, overwhelmed, and broken yourself. So as much as we can take those few minutes preventatively to take care of ourselves, and we'll be better at helping the people that we love. Keeping structure and routine where we can. And this may feel like a challenge, and it goes right in line with that boundary discussion, because we've really had to be flexible during this time, right? We've had to make a lot of accommodations. A lot of the things that we were used to have fallen away and are not happening. But as much as we can, where we're able, the more that we can keep some kind of a structure in place, the better. So doing things at the time where we normally would have done them, you know, getting up, getting dressed, even if you're working from home, putting on your shoes, putting on makeup if that's something you do, having your breakfast at the breakfast table at the normal time, you know, going to bed at the same time, setting up those routines where you can. And obviously, like I said, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic and things change constantly. But as much as you can, separate, create the boundaries, be deliberate in taking care of yourself and differentiating different parts of the day and different areas where your life will happen. You know, obviously we're not maybe doing all the things that we had to do, and maybe not managing a million comings and goings like we were when everything was fully open and we could come and go as we pleased. But it's still important for our stress responses to keep those structures in place and follow a routine as much as we can. It's going to make you feel better too. And that overall will help with stress. And then, of course, you know, what we're experiencing, what you are experiencing may be beyond our control, and you might need some extra help, and that's okay. There is no shame in needing help. And it's important that you reach out if you don't feel like what you're dealing with in your stress can be handled on your own. And some people, you know, they look at it reaching out as like means a sign of weakness, but really, you know, you are not alone. There are so many people that need therapy at some point in their life or another, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you need it forever. You know, maybe this whole situation is just completely overwhelming, and believe me, it is, not just for you, for everybody. And so if you really feel like it's something that you can't cope with, don't feel ashamed. Call, reach out, talk to somebody who can help you. There are so many amazing resources now available, support groups that are virtual, so you can access them even just from the comfort of your own home. More opportunities now for telehealth than ever before. So it doesn't even require like leaving your home sometimes to get the help that you might need to overcome some of these situations. But definitely not being afraid and looking for those different resources that might be available in your area, because, you know, it's not weird. It doesn't make you weak. Believe me, there have been multiple times throughout this ordeal where I felt like I might need to talk to somebody if this keeps going much longer. And, you know, and I've had some good chats with friends, and I'm very thankful that this is Mental Health Awareness Month, because we've been doing this community chat series with AMHC, which is Aristic Mental Health Center. So I've actually been having these conversations with some of the professionals in this area, and it's almost been a little therapeutic for me myself. But never feel ashamed if you feel like you can't do this alone. You are not alone in that. And there are many, many people struggling in this alternate universe that we're living in right now. So don't be afraid. Reach out, get the help you need if you need help. These are just some crisis information numbers and resources if you are really struggling and feel like something is beyond your control in dealing with the amount of stress that you might be under. But overall, just some of the tips that I shared today are really just some good places to start and look for ways where stress might be overtaking you, and ways where you can begin to kind of reclaim some control over the things that may be impacting you. Because if you leave them unchecked long term, they really can take a very negative turn on your life and on your health and wellness overall. So that's all I have, and I don't know if you have any questions.
I have two questions.
Yes.
The first one it was from the beginning slides. It was about the adrenaline and cortisol. It said fight or flight. Can you explain more this? What does it mean, fight or flight?
Fight or flight. Okay, so fight or flight is, when you're stressed out in certain situations, they call it the fight or flight. Like you're either going to get that overwhelming response that's going to kind of give you the energy to fight and like when someone upsets you and you have that anger response and you're like, I'm going to hurt this person. Like that's a stress response when you feel that energy kind of come up inside you where you want to get up in someone's face and say, I'm ready to do this. You're not going to talk this way to me. That's a stress response. And that's why we feel that emboldened. I'm not normally that aggressive as an individual, but there have been times in my life where I've had that stress response like, oh no, she didn't. She did not just do this. And I am ready to fight with this person. And that is a stress response. And then the other hand of that is where you get that stress response and you're ready to run out of there. And that's like where you encounter a negative situation that you really don't want to be a part of. That's like when you're camping and you walk out to go to the outhouse or the woods and you see like a bear there by your campfire and you're like, okay, I'm ready to run out of here, and I don't even run. That's that flight response. So
okay,
great.
Thank you. And the other is, would 30 minutes of yoga daily would count towards those 60 minutes that is suggested?
You kind of broke up on there, but I think you're asking about the 30 minutes of exercise multiple times a day being as good as 60 minutes?
No, if doing 30 minutes of yoga a day will count towards those 60.
Absolutely. There are so many great health and wellness benefits from doing yoga. And obviously different exercise works different parts of the body. And so there are different positions with yoga that work different parts of the body. And obviously you're not going to get the same kind of workout that you would from like a 30-minute cardio workout or 30-minute strength training workout where you're using, big weights and things. But I mean, a 30-minute yoga workout for people who are not very active is going to be a pretty substantial workout. And depending on the postures and the positions that you use in that yoga, and now there are so many different yogas. There are ones that even kind of include some of those kicking motions like yoga tai chi and all different kinds of yogas out there that can work all different kinds of and parts of our body. But yeah, yoga absolutely counts as good physical activity and can be very helpful from many different perspectives. The mental positioning, because it's kind of putting you in that mindfulness place. And that I feel like coupled with the physical aspect of it, I think the mental and the physical combination of yoga almost for me makes it a little more powerful than just a physical workout, having that mind and body connect. I don't know, for me, it feels much more valuable to me than just kind of running around a track for 15 minutes. I don't know. That may be just a personal thing, but I feel like it's definitely valuable.
Okay, I don't have more questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate everything.